Office of Cable Television, we're about to start. I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. This is the second of two hearings we're having today, and this hearing concerns PR 25-8, which is entitled District of Columbia Auditor Kathleen Patterson Reappointment Resolution of 2023. The stated purpose of this resolution is to confirm the reappointment of Kathleen Patterson as the District of Columbia Auditor for a 6-year term to expire February 25th, 2029. The mission of the Office of the District of Columbia Auditor is to support the Council of the District of Columbia by conducting audits that improve the economy, efficiency, and accountability of district government. The office was established by Congress as part of the Home Rule Act to serve the legislature, similar to the U.S. Government Accountability Office. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony from the public as to the fitness of Ms. Patterson for reappointment as auditor. This resolution was introduced by me on January 3rd. This is a council appointment, not a confirmation, but rather an appointment. We have, the record in this matter will be open until 5 p.m. next Monday, February 6th. We are planning on marking up this resolution at a Committee of the Whole meeting on February 7th and transmitting it to the full council for its consideration on February 7th. So the record will close at 5 p.m. on Monday, February 6th. We have two public witnesses before we will hear from the nominee, Robert Vincent Branham and Fritz Mulhauser. Mr. Branham, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greetings and salutations, Chairman Mendelson and members of the Committee of the Whole. I am Robert Vincent Branham, former Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner 5E08 and President Emeritus of the DC Federation of Civic Associations. I am pleased and honored to appear before the committee to support PR 25-8, the nomination of the Honorable Kathleen Patterson for reappointment as the District of Columbia Auditor. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I have known Kathy for a number of years in her public service to the people of the district. My interactions with Kathy over the years has been from the perspective of an engaged community activist and as an advisory neighborhood commissioner. Kathy and I did not always agree on issues. However, Kathy was always respectful and willing to listen. Some time ago in the not too distant past, Kathy and I were Democratic primary candidates for the office of chair of the Council of the District of Columbia. A ruling from the United States Office of Special Counsel indicated I could not run for chair of the council as an advisory neighborhood commissioner, which resulted in my withdrawal from the race. Later, Kathy and I served together on the board of the DC Open Government Coalition. There are few people who walk in high heels of professionalism, dignity, and respect. Kathy is deserving of reappointment as the District of Columbia Auditor. However, as I support Kathy's reappointment, I am moved to refer 2 items for her office's consideration. First, it is my recommendation the Auditor's Office develop an active progressive plan to assist and support ANC's financial record keeping for more accurate and timely compliance with appropriate district laws. The emphasis should be on supporting agencies rather than punishing agencies. As a former ANC treasurer, I took the stance there is a difference between a treasurer and an accountant. My second recommendation would be for the auditor's office to survey and review the practice of district agencies presenting non-disclosure agreements or non-disclosure type agreements to silence departing employees or to withhold certain earned financial personnel rights and obligations. Are such agreements ethical and legal? These two recommendations, I believe, will help to close gaps where there should not be any. Let me close where I began. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I strongly support the reappointment of the Honorable Kathleen Patterson as District of Columbia Auditor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Branham. I don't have a copy of your statement.
I will be forwarding it right up in short order.
Excellent. Fritz Mulhauser.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Fritz Mulhauser. I'm a longtime ward. Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, good afternoon.
Now I'm on video, I guess. I'm Fritz Mulhauser. I'm a longtime Ward 6 resident in the district. And in my years of employment, I've had the opportunity to work at GAO, the Government Accountability Office, and take part in the expansion and redirection of an audit agency to a broader analysis agency that can serve a broader set of needs of a legislature. And I'm happy to see that Kathy Patterson has done that in her first term. And I joined my colleague Bob Branham in recommending her reappointment so that her record of accomplishment may continue. She brought excellent qualifications when she arrived in the office as a reporter, as an elected council member, and as a nonprofit organization leader directing how policy and research could work better together. These are talents and values that she's brought to her leadership in the auditor office. The office has grown in scope and impact under her direction. The very last tally for reports issued in 2018 to 20 showed that up to last January, 71 of 96 recommendations from their reports were implemented or in progress. And that's included important, groundbreaking, and hard-hitting reports on production of housing, the 911 emergency call center, the police department use of force, and many other topics. Let me offer two suggestions from my experience to guide the next few years of the work of the auditor. First, I recommend that the council and executive work be focused on high-risk areas. The auditor is exceptionally well positioned to know about agencies where there are vulnerabilities to fraud, waste, abuse, mismanagement, or simply needs for transformation so that they become effective where there may be ineffectiveness now. GAO has done this, listing about 36 agencies at the start of every congressional session, and the results have been simply spectacular. More than $600 billion in financial benefits from that kind of focused attention. It helps the council direct their legislative work, including oversight. It helps the mayor, city administrator, budget and plan, and it helps the agency's leadership sustaining the kind of planning and execution needed to reduce risk. And I commend that kind of exercise to the auditor and the council. My second point for consideration is that big problems need deeper oversight and more assured access to data to understand what's going on and set new directions. Reviewing major programs is hard work, and it's simply unbelievable that the auditor has been stymied by agencies of the district government refusing to cooperate by providing data. That has to end, and the DC data officer, I believe, should be tasked to take the lead to write new regulations telling agencies how they can honor federal laws about data privacy, protect citizens' records that need to be protected, but also allow for the merging, combining, and exploiting of data so that the council's committees can understand through the auditor's work with good data just how things are working. I spent 6 months in a project a while back negotiating data so that police, court, and other records could come together to enable a study. And that was wasted time because of the difficulty of doing what I'm speaking about. So please vote in favor of Kathy Patterson's reappointment. And please direct some improvements in focus and resources so that her wonderful work will continue. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mulhauser. Thank you, both of you, for your testimony. Mr. Mulhauser, I would like you to explain more the second point in your written statement. Big problems need deeper oversight and assured access to data. Is that a comment on the auditor? Your first statement focused council and executive on essential areas of government. Had a recommendation that the auditor should consider establishing a list of government programs and operations that are high risk. But your second one, I'm not clear whether that's about the auditor or about the council.
It's directed at both. The auditor helps the council by bringing important facts to light. The auditor is being stymied in doing that too many times by simple refusal of executive agencies to cooperate. The statutory mandate is clear, but agencies have been wily in posing barriers, for example, claiming federal law prohibits access to the data. That's often simply untrue. And the auditor's lawyers have had to decide whether to spend months litigating something or move on and do the best they can without data. In the education data audit, the education agency simply refused to provide a whole year of student data. It had devastating effects in several areas. So my recommendation to the council is to assist the auditor by directing the DC data officer in the Office of Chief Technology Officer to write new rules to correct the situation. The federal government is under the exact same pressure from potential uses of data being stymied, and the recent CHIPS Act contains a provision by which the National Science Foundation is going to investigate time and money to sort out how we can better use federal data, and the exact same problem exists here, and it needs attention.
Thank you. I don't believe any colleagues are at the hearing. Know what I want to say on the Zoom. And I don't have any other questions for either of you. Mr. Branham, you'll get us your statement, Mr. Mulhauser.
I sent it. You and Mr. Cash should have received it.
We're not as fast as you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, each of you. I'm going to turn now to the nominee, Kathy Patterson. Good afternoon. You are at the moment are a little box on my screen, but this is apparently one of the first hybrid hearings that the council's had. Everybody's participating virtually, but I'm in the council chambers and there actually could be other people here. So you are visible to me as a little box on the screen, but as soon as you speak, you'll become much larger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Shall I go ahead with my statement then?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Kathy Patterson. I'm starting my 9th year as auditor. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for nominating me to another term, which I actually see as recognition of the progress we've made at the Office of the DC Auditor. And that is almost wholly attributable to an excellent, hardworking, and committed staff. I welcome the opportunity to continue to serve, and to that end, I would ask the committee and the full council to support the resolution before you. Let me also thank Mr. Branham and Mr. Mulhauser for the statements that they just made. I'm very appreciative of them taking their own time and effort to appear before the council. They, as I believe Mr. Branham mentioned, the 3 of us were founding board members of the DC Open Government Coalition, and it's always good to see such good colleagues again. Mr. Chairman, when you and I first discussed the possibility of my serving as DC Auditor, I was encouraged by the committee's desire to see ODCA become a more nimble and adventuresome office, including trying new ways to secure accountability from District of Columbia government agencies. You and your staff encouraged me and my team to mirror the range of performance audits conducted by the Government Accountability Office, and we have sought, and I believe we have succeeded in doing both of those things. And I'd like to highlight a few of the specifics to document the progress ODCA has made. This past October, we published a report titled 36 Fired MPD Officers Reinstated, Received $14 million in back pay. That report was covered by radio outlets WTOP, WMAL, WAMU, broadcast outlets channels 7, 9, 4, and 5, as well as CNBC and DC NewsHour, print outlets DCist, Washington City Paper, The Washington Post, both a news story and an editorial. A month later, we published an update on our October 2021 audit of the Office of Unified Communications and our troubled 911 system, which prompted similar extensive coverage. I mention these as just 2 examples of the greater visibility that the Office of the DC Auditor has today than it did 8 years ago. ODCA is on Twitter and more recently LinkedIn, which will be used not only for increased visibility of our reports, but also in our recruitment activities. Our Twitter highlights for November included a tweet sharing the findings of our Department of General Services report showing the mishandling of repairs at schools and shortcomings in work order management across DC. That garnered more than 51,000 impressions, meaning that the tweet was seen that many times. We have our own blog called Auditude, which has brought a lighter touch to some of our audit topics, and visits to our website, dcauditor.org, continue to grow. Our average number of sessions on the site is at 3,000 per month, up from last year's average of 2,000. Of course, greater visibility isn't necessarily a measure of effectiveness, but it is easier to have an impact on agency operations, on passage of legislation, on creation of new programs to meet demonstrated needs when there is public attention given to the issues explored in our reports. I am proud of the visibility we've achieved as an aid to actual effectiveness. The strong performance by the agency has been reflected in our last 3 peer reviews in 2016, 2019, and 2022. Each review gave ODCA the highest rating. Accountability offices such as ours, like the Office of the Inspector General and other audit and IG shops around the country that follow the generally accepted government auditing standards, undertake triennial reviews by national partner organizations. For our organization, these include national organizations of state and also of city audit offices and the National Conference of State Legislatures affiliate, the National Legislative Program Evaluation Society. The 2016 peer review was conducted by the Association of Local Government Auditors. The ALGA team found that our own internal quality control reports constituted an excellent tool for assessing the effectiveness of ODCA's quality control system and identifying areas for improvement. For the first time in 2019, we invited the NCSL affiliate to conduct our peer review, since we are in fact part of the legislative branch of government. At the conclusion of a week-long on-site review, that peer review team informed us that we again received the highest rating. They noted in their view the strengths of the agency included a diverse staff, well-written reports, and a commitment to improving procedures to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of operations. Last year, again, we received the highest rating, and again from a team assigned by the NCSL's Program Evaluation Organization. That team found that we continue to attentively follow the generally accepted government auditing standards published by the Comptroller General. And these peer reviews we do publish on our website. With the invitation early on by the committee to explore new accountability tools, we have over the last 8 years contracted for a variety of public opinion polls to inform our work and that of the council. Most ambitious was a reprise of a survey that the Financial Authority conducted in 1997, asking district residents to rate the quality of district services. We learned that district residents in the summer of 2019 were mostly comfortable with their city services. Half-rated services generally as either good or excellent, while only 1 in 8 said the services were poor or very poor. That was a marked contrast from the Control Board's 1997 survey, when only 15% rated district services as excellent or good, and almost half said services were poor or very poor. Other polls we've conducted have included in 2018 a parent opinion survey. The council had requested and provided funding for an audit of enrollment in DC public schools, including projections for enrollment for 5 and 10 years and a model for projecting enrollment over time. To help the district understand how parents make their decisions on enrollment, we conducted this survey, which found that parents, while they have a wide variety of choices, prefer that the district invest in neighborhood public schools rather than increasing their options for choice and for children to attend out-of-boundary schools. We also contracted for a survey of principals. This was designed to provide answers to at least some of the questions that the State Board of Education had posed, seeking, quote, an education system that prioritizes appearances and outcome data over genuine improvement. And this followed the controversy about school graduation rates. We invited participation by principals in each of DCPS's 108 elementary, middle, and high schools, and we got a 43% response rate on that survey. Another innovation was a secret shopper test that some of the most used district services by our veteran government analyst and former council staffer, Jason Jeffers. He recruited a large proportion of staffers in ODCA to serve with him to test our agency, seeking information or assistance from the 311 call center, DCRA, the Office of the CFO, the Metropolitan Police Department, DC Schools, Department of Human Services, and the Department of Public Works. Overall performance was fair to good, and we recommended that the mayor update customer service protocols, including deadlines for responding to residents. We also have hosted roundtable discussions to explore important high priority issues in a way to elicit the expertise of district residents without the lengthy procedures required for an actual audit. In 2017, we invited past and current members of the district's Homeland Security Commission to discuss the commission's work, its challenges and successes, and recommendations for future topics. And we were joined by the then chairman of the council's Judiciary Committee, Mr. Allen. A second roundtable in 2018, we invited experts on education research and government, some of whom had been in elected or appointed positions in DC, and all of whom were familiar with the history of reform efforts. That 90-minute discussion was taped, transcribed, and edited lightly for length. Last year, on contract with us, the Council for Court Excellence conducted a series of similar roundtables, but discussions on justice-related topics, and each was published as an ODCA CCE joint report available on each organization's website. Mr. Chairman, as you know, you and the committee have played a major role in improving our own ability to take on more and higher priority issues by removing some of the mandates we were under previously and restricting what were administrative responsibilities associated with the city's advisory neighborhood commissions. The record for my initial confirmation included an evaluation of the agency initiated by former Chairman Kwame Brown. That office study undertaken by community leaders made a number of wide-ranging recommendations. And two of the areas covered were the statutory requirements for audits over time that had held a lower priority, and the time-consuming responsibilities associated with ANC administration. And as you well know, you have enacted two bills in 2016 and last year to eliminate or otherwise reduce the statutory mandates. These important changes have given us wider latitude to spend time and resources on other projects with a higher priority. With regard to the advisory neighborhood commissions, we retain the responsibility to issue an annual report on the financial activities. And of course, we have the authority and the discretion to audit individual ANCs. But the council did move forward with legislation to transfer some of our ministerial responsibilities to the Office of the Advisory Neighborhood Commissions, and we work closely on that transition. Several years ago, we conducted a survey of advisory neighborhood commissioners as a version of a risk assessment to help in developing our work plan. One of the reports that resulted was one you have returned to on several occasions, Mr. Chairman, the 2017 report on DCRA management of vacant and blighted properties. Two other major ODCA reports were similarly the result of repeated community requests for our review, including the 2021 audit of the district's 911 program and projects underway today to look at Mayor Bowser's Vision Zero initiative. We have two reports on that topic, one to come out fairly soon, looking at the Department of Transportation's engineering efforts, and a second one we have just initiated to look at enforcement for Vision Zero goals. And that one will be looking at MPD, at DDOT, and the Department of Public Works. In terms of challenges ahead, a persistent challenge for my office, as well as every other accountability office at the local, state, and federal effort level, is to maintain a collaborative working relationship with the agencies and the programs under scrutiny. And there will always be tension between an auditor and an auditee, but that can be minimized with frequent open communication. And we have sought to be as collaborative as possible with our executive branch colleagues, but we have had mixed results. My preferred way to release a report, for example, is to do so jointly with the agency under audit, and we've only succeeded in doing that once. You joined us, Mr. Chairman, in a press conference to release our first use of force report, along with then Police Chief Kathy Lanier and the author of the report, Michael Bromwich. I've proposed such an approach on other occasions, but without further success. We will keep trying, however. Jointly releasing something where we meet with press together in order to pose questions and answer questions promotes clear communications of the goals of our recommendations and helps to foster an atmosphere in which the auditee can agree and goes forward with those recommendations. We have a different kind of challenge in our working relationship with our principal audience, the DC Council. And for a third year in a row, we will be releasing a report on recommendation compliance that found that the council itself fails to act on more audit recommendations than any other part of government. But to address these kinds of issues, we now have a second staff member, Ruth Werner, who's joined General Counsel Amy Belanca with responsibility for staying in touch with council and committee offices. And last year, they began outreach sessions with almost every council office, which has helped shape our work plan and allow for discussion of different topics. After the council's recent organizational meeting, I sent letters to the chairman of committees, both new and continuing chairman, to advise them of the projects we had underway in their committee's purview and look forward to continuing conversations. We were very encouraged by the step the council took to include in the annual budget submission resolution a requirement that agency performance reports include the status of compliance with ODCA reports. This is consistent with DC code that actually requires the mayor to inform the council of what action has been taken on auditor recommendations. And over the last year, the council has held public oversight roundtables on topics directly related to our reports. I will continue to work with you, Mr. Chairman, with this committee and with your colleagues toward our shared goal of improving government operations. Through all of our performance and budget hearings and additional hearings and roundtables, I believe you're very aware of some of our major accomplishments over the last 8 years. A few of the highlights of impactful audits include the 6 reports we did on the Housing Production Trust Fund, a series of audits on school modernization projects, and I'm hopeful that our current focus on the Department of General Services management of facilities post-modernization will preserve the value of the modernizations we've already achieved. And other recommendations from our 2016 report on MPD use of force have been largely adopted by MPD, and we followed up that work following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis in 2020 with case studies on officer-involved fatalities. One of the Police Reform Commission's recommendations, as you know, has been enacted by the council based on your legislation, Mr. Chairman. And we are in the process today of a national search for a deputy auditor for public safety. And we will be building out a unit within ODCA to focus on improving performance of the district's law enforcement agencies. As Mr. Mulhauser mentioned, and as required by the DC Council in December 2018, we published a 2-volume education data audit on the district's collection and use of data to improve our public schools. We will soon be completing an extensive series of reports on the impact and mitigation efforts related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have ready to come out in the course of the next year an audit on the district's expenditure of funding provided by the CARES Act, on the pandemic's impact on behavioral health services, and the experience of district nursing homes during the pandemic. There is a final accomplishment that is intangible, but I would like to note. I described the heightened visibility of the office and the fact that we have undertaken audits at the request of the community. To have district residents be aware that there is a responsive accountability organization within the city's legislative branch of government is an accomplishment in itself. A responsive and responsible Office of the DC Auditor is something to be proud of. Intangible, yes, but invaluable. This concludes my statement, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to respond to any questions. Thank you again, and thank you for the opportunity to continue to serve.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. So I have a few questions. Give me just a second. I was just checking. I think we've been joined by Councilmember Henderson, so I'll be on a 10-minute clock. I think I have 4 or 5 questions, maybe 6 or more. Standard questions. Are you current in your taxes, fines, liabilities, whatever, to the district and federal government?
Yes, I am.
And this is kind of a new and different question. Do you have any pending litigation or other potentially negative items that may serve as distractions?
No.
Does the auditor ever get sued?
There was a notification received by and I'm just forgetting whether it's the Office of Risk Management or the OAG, from the police union saying they might be interested in filing a suit related to our report on terminations and reinstatements. That's the only thing that I'm aware of right now.
And nothing has come of it since then.
No.
I do want to know, because you mentioned this in your testimony, I think I am in arrears in responding to your audit compliance request, and we're going to see if we can get that out this week.
Please don't, Mr. Chairman. We have a footnote in the report that will be released next week that says all the committees responded except one, but we did our research on that one, and so you're covered.
All right, I might still respond, but okay, I appreciate that. Yes, the request came in while we were at the end of the council period and things were pretty crazy. And then unfortunately it got sort of pushed to the side, and then I remembered it. Fritz Mulhauser testified, the ODCA should consider establishing a list of DC government programs and operations that are high risk, vulnerable to fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, or need transformation to become effective. GAO list of about 3 dozen is issued every 2 years and has been very successful. How do you respond to that?
I think that's an excellent idea. The office was just concluding a risk assessment when I took this position And we have done only informal risk assessments since then in terms of using that tool to identify topics for audits. We essentially identified projects based on what appear to be priorities, and it is really, as I say, it's been a very informal process, but I think there's a great deal of value in looking at how the GAO does that in a very formal way. One of the challenges will be determining what are the elements that make up the risk assessment. I mean, some obvious ones would be the number of dollars spent in a program or an agency or a division, the number of people affected, the depth of that, how that effect, like, is it a life and death situation? But the challenge then is to come up with a criteria against which to measure our agencies. But I think it's an exercise worth doing, and it's something that I look forward to talking with him more about, and maybe seeing how we can adapt that kind of approach to the work that we do. Another challenge, though, I will admit, will be determining, as I say, the criteria against which to measure successes of programs. That's a challenge we have in all of our audits. We typically find many programs don't have standard operating procedures. In many cases, there aren't deliverables or goals or purposes included in creation of a program. So that's something that I think is also worth thinking about in terms of for example, when a program is created, whether it's by legislation or by administrative fiat, to make sure there are ways in which to measure whether it is in fact successful or not. So these are just some things to think about in coming up with a more formal risk register.
Well, I asked the question because Mr. Mulhauser recommended it, but I assumed that you sort of did something like that. And I would think that if you look at GAO, maybe you can, maybe that will, how do I say, inform what I want to say key performance indicators, that's the wrong phrase, but what the criteria are that you should look at. I mean, I guess we identify organizations where there's risk, agencies where there's risk anecdotally, and maybe
Right.
Something a little bit more disciplined would
Right.
be useful.
But that is also a way, though, to say, if you come up with a list of factors to use to measure risk, where those factors aren't even addressed in an agency or a program is also informative.
Okay, I'm not sure I completely follow, but I would assume that our experience is no different than the federal government, that there are agencies where, I mean, there are all kinds of different agencies. And so risk takes many forms. And risk, of course, in this context is about waste, fraud, or abuse, or vulnerability to lawsuits and litigation, which sort
But
of
another risk is the risk of not doing what you said you were going to be doing. The risk of not meeting a program or an agency's purpose. And that is part of a risk assessment typically.
sometimes
What's standing in the way of you achieving your goals.
sometimes that feels like the whole government. Be that as it may, I sent you a letter in December with regard to asking that your office review and assess the school nurse program. I spoke with you about it briefly. I have the letter in front of me. I do want to ask you, this is going to end up with asking you, where are we with this? But I do want to read this just so it's on the record. My understanding is that the program consists of a grant from the Department of Health to Children's National Hospital. Because it is a grant as opposed to a contract, there may be program elements that are left to the grantee rather than prescribed by the agency. Further, I understand that the nurses are employees of the hospital, which makes it difficult for school leaders to direct the nurses. There are other concerns with the program. For instance, there are temp agency nurses contracted by Children's National who often have no child development training. Department of Health has not defined the role of the school nurse, so their actual responsibilities vary from school to school. There's a high turnover of nurses. Nurses are not assigned as individuals to a school, so the nurse may be a different person each day. Nurses are not present full-time or every day despite the law. Vaccine data collection is inconsistent, and the Department of Health does not have an established list of requirements for school health suites. meaning where these nurses will be in the school. So what's good enough in one school is unacceptable in another. Now, these were complaints that were brought to my attention primarily by the charter sector, but a number of us on the council have been struggling with, for example, vaccination compliance, and why is it that the school nurses can't administer vaccines? We want to see nurses in the schools to improve public health, and other reasons is good for the kids. So my ask was that you look at the program, interview with stakeholders. We've had some back and forth. I think you had indicated last that if you do an audit, it could be a year, which is an awfully long time. I think at this point on January 30th, it's too late to get something useful for this year's budget. But this is a program that cross-cuts the Committee on Health, the Committee of the Whole, which has education. So what's going on there?
Thank you. We have added this to our work plan, and there is a particular individual on staff who has been designated as the auditor in charge. And I've had at least one conversation with some of those from whom you have heard on these issues. So we are in a very preliminary place in getting a project on that topic started. I concur with you. I agree with you that this is an incredibly important program. I don't know that you would have any reason to remember this, but this was a program that I did oversight on as chair of Government Operations Committee many, many years ago. And we even, at that point, we had contract nurses. And one of the results of that oversight hearing was that a contract nursing company was debarred and no longer worked for the District of Columbia because of some of the issues that had been raised about that company itself and the kind of oversight it provided. So I share your concern with these issues, and they are only getting more serious given the pandemic and post-pandemic of the need for this program to operate effectively in all of our schools. So that is something that we are just getting started on.
And a timeline for deliverables? I hate to put it that way. When would we see something?
We try to measure ourselves as completing audit projects within a 10-month time frame. So when I mentioned a year for an audit report, that's not out of the realm of what is typical for the work that we do.
So it could be the end of this year.
Could conceivably, sure.
Might be useful if there's something interim so that as we go into the new school year in the fall, we can talk about this more. I'm 18 seconds over. There's another council member here. I do have a few more questions, so there'll be another round at least for me. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Ms. Patterson. Mr. Chairman, we should talk about the school nurses, because before you have Kathy go down a line of doing a full audit, they are reevaluating how they do the program. So we should talk offline so everybody can save themselves some work there. But good afternoon. I have just a few questions. Ms. Patterson, can you talk about what percentage of the audits out of your office you all contract out in terms of an independent firm doing the work?
Sure, it's less than half, but it is a proportion that has been growing on my watch because we appreciate the fact that we're in Washington, D.C., we're in the nation's capital. There are consultants everywhere, and there is expertise, and that's something that we can take advantage of expertise. We don't have subject matter experts on staff in any particular sense, although they develop expertise by auditing. So that's also an advantage of being able to sort of selectively find expertise.
And do those, when you do choose to go, let's say, out of house for some of these projects, is it through a traditional contracting process, or are there several firms for which you have a sole source contract with?
All of the above. I do have, as a DC auditor, independent procurement authority. We obviously have to follow procurement law, but not necessarily procurement regs. When we do a large audit, we do issue an RFP. So for example, the 911 audit, we issued an RFP. We currently have a police staffing study in the field now, and we issued an RFP for that and had several very good bidders. Some of the smaller projects, I've used my discretion to do the sole source, and we essentially, I think our policies require us to have essentially a note to file that then is available if someone wants to know the reasoning behind a sole source.
Okay. And so when you do choose to go out of house for some of these, the recommendations for the agencies, are those coming from the private companies in consultation with your staff, or are you reviewing their findings and then developing the recommendations in-house?
Typically, they develop the recommendations, but we don't issue a report with recommendations with which we don't agree. So
Okay.
if there's something that we question, we would raise concerns about that and sort of duke that out. I've actually not had that experience. I think we've been very lucky in the contractors we have worked with, because we haven't had to fight over anything. We've essentially made sure that all the points were well taken, and then have begun tracking those recommendations along with the ones from our in-house audits.
So what happens in those occasions when a private auditor, they complete it, they come to you, say, this is what we found, and you all say, but did you look here? Did you look here? Or you might disagree with some of those things. How does that back and forth work?
We will say, well, and in fact, this just happened in a specific example this past week, where I asked some questions about where did you get that information, and then was satisfied with the answer. Because
Okay.
it's something where given my experience, I occasionally have preconceived notions, and it turned out I was wrong and they were right in this one particular thing I'm thinking of. So it's an iterative process. But one of the things that we do try to do through the RFP process is really screen and really find people who know what they're talking about. I think when we put out the 911 report in October of 2021, I think one of my talking points was something like, the people who did this work have 100 years among them in this field. So
Right.
we do try to make sure that we have folks, and the screening process is meant to make sure that we have work that we know we can then trust.
Okay. In terms of the coverage of agencies, like obviously I think I have an understanding of how you all do the projects and things like that. I think in the past, my office is we've sent you a note of saying, hey, can you look at these things? Or even when I worked for the committee. But do you ever like look back on your plan and just say, there's some agencies here we have never looked at, and perhaps we should, or, I mean, it's not to say that something is wrong or not wrong, but that it's healthy from an oversight perspective for every now and again, an agency's either chief project or initiative or something like that to go through an audit process. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And that is a very good exercise for us to do, because there may well be agencies that we have not touched in my 8 years on the job. I was pleased recently when we sent letters to new and continuing committee chairs that we sent a letter to each committee chair, which meant there was something on our work plan that touched that committee's work. So that was a very informal way of doing the kind of assessment you're talking about, but I was pleased that it was successful. But no, that's a very good point to make. And one thing, when the chairman raised the issue of looking at the school nurse program, one of my hesitations there is that we have done a whole slew of reports related to the Department of Health. And on that score, we probably shouldn't do another one for a while. But then there are other arguments that you sort of have to balance back and forth.
Baby, hold on. Sorry, I have an intern.
No, that's okay.
So on that front, I just want to I'm going to toss this nugget out and then I'm just going to leave it alone. I realized while I was driving down the road, I was behind one of the AMR ambulance services vans. And I remember back when I was a staffer, when we decided to go with an AMR contract, the whole idea from FIMS was that, this is supposed to be temporary. And now I think that was maybe 2015. And we still are using them. And, I was just kind of being nosy in preference and preparation for this hearing. And I was like, we done an audit of FIMS in a while as an agency. Not calling out FIMS, but I'm just sort of saying, like, when we look at some of these things of, I think to the chairman's point of, are we fulfilling the goal of what we initially said that we were going to do? And in this particular case, I'm sort of thinking about it from a contract perspective of, we thought that this was temporary and now it has become an almost permanent fixture in our system. Is that a good thing? I don't know.
My guess is, from what little I do know about this, is that those who said it was a temporary fix possibly were the political people in the administration, and those who said we need to be doing this permanently are the folks at FIMS.
Got it.
But I also know that the Inspector General did some work on that contract, and related to that, I may have some information I can share with you just on that point.
Okay. I guess sort of drawing off of that question, at one point, do you feel like in certain things that you have to get the IG involved, or that is appropriate for you to pass off something to the IG? Because I think
when we find something criminal, we refer to either the AG or the IG. We don't have police powers as such. So we have this, we can talk about the risk of fraud. If we say not only risk of fraud, that's fraud right there, then we can and have referred to the IG.
Okay. Because I think something that might be troublesome, maybe for some of my colleagues, I think about it for me as now the chair of the health committee, right, is that there are some programs for which I'm like, we should probably do an audit here, but is it more appropriate for you versus sending something to the IG? Is the litmus test, if we feel like there's some sort of criminal activity, that it should always go to the IG?
I think that's one good call to make.
Okay.
But also do keep in mind, they have roughly 3 times the budget and 3 times the staff. And they have the Medicaid fraud control unit. So if it's in that area, that is in their purview. So there are a few differences. We tried, the Dan Lucas and I try to stay in very close touch so that we don't duplicate efforts, and so that things that are important don't fall through the cracks. So we do try to coordinate.
If you, it's sort of, I'm wrapping up here, Mr. Chairman, is sort of thinking about your next piece in your tenure here. Are there things that you feel like you need in order to be successful that you don't currently have?
We have adequate resources. We're well resourced. What I would like to see us be is more impactful, where there are recommendations that we make, for example, for legislation that aren't followed up on. I want, and I that's that's my responsibility. It's not something I'm saying it's a shared responsibility. That's why we're trying to build closer working relationships with committees and committee staff at the council. So that is one thing that I see as a goal for myself in the next couple of years. And the point that Fritz Mulhauser made in his testimony on use of data, I think that's another issue. We are looking at building a data unit within ODCA. First is to hire someone who will be the director of that unit, and we're not there yet. But we want to be able to use data more and better. And we want to encourage the government to share data better. So those are a couple of areas that I see myself as working toward.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your willingness to continue sticking it out with us and serving. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Council Member.
Thank you, Council Member. I had a couple more questions. Can you say more about the new deputy auditor for public safety?
Just that we're advertising to hire for that position. We've sent out probably, about 40 messages to various and sundry organizations, individuals, networking. We placed an ad with the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, an organization that is made up of auditors and IGs in the law enforcement arena. So we have, I believe we've received some applications at this point. And my plan would be to hire someone very good and very strong in that position. And then for that individual to work with me and our current staff to complete the hiring.
And remind me, it's 1 or 2 additional FTEs?
A lot more than that, Mr. Chairman. I believe we are budgeted for something like 8 FTEs in terms of the FTE budget. In terms of dollars, we're budgeted for probably about a total of 6 FTEs.
Just got lost. We in the budget, we said 8 or 9 FTEs, but then we gave you money for 6?
That's correct. And this goes back to the fact that I provided the council with an estimate of what I thought a full year budget would look like, and then cut it back to what would be a partial year for when the dollars were being considered. And the FTE number was accepted and the partial year budget was accepted. But because this is a new entity and a new unit within our department, I think it would make sense to, I think it's something like 1.2 million for the Deputy Auditor for Public Safety unit in terms of personnel. It would make sense to hire good people to that level. And if we feel we need more FTEs and more money, if we need more money to have more FTEs, then I would make that case. But I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. The other question I have, you had mentioned in your testimony about the audit or study that you did with regard to contracting. It started with focus on Roosevelt, and then you issued a preliminary report with regard to DGS's
on work orders.
Work orders, yes. A couple years ago, which might actually be more like 4 or 5 years ago, you did an in-depth evaluation of, I believe it was the Dahlgren Apartments, and DCRA's response or lack thereof to housing code violations, inspections. You, in your testimony today, you referenced the audit that you did a few years ago that I've referred to a number of times on vacant buildings. All of these efforts and many, many more, which I didn't name, have one thing in common, and that is it seems that the agencies don't really improve. So that's kind of what I'm tossing out at you. This is sort of a difficult question, but how do we get the agencies to respond and improve? I think the vacant property one, DCRA actually said they disagreed with your recommendations. At least they were honest that they weren't going to implement them. But usually the agencies say that they agree with most of the recommendations. And this is a rhetorically stated, do you think DGS has changed its work order process? Do you think that the Department of Buildings has changed its housing inspection response? Do you think Department of Buildings has gotten rid of all of the problems that were identified with vacant properties?
No, I think to all of the above. I think one of the things I have been told about the Department of General Services is that the council finally stopped cutting their budget every year. And so maybe they now will have enough money to be able to be more effective. I don't know the truth to that. That's not something that I've looked at specifically, the funding issue. I think the conversations that we have had about the work order system, I think there seems to be an interest in fixing that. The report that we are preparing to release on the Roosevelt High School problems, I think will add a lot more information to that issue. And I think shows at least an effort on the part of the current agency leadership to try to get a handle on things. But I believe there remains some kind of an issue with how we manage as a government our relationship with our private sector contractors and the extent to which we hold them fully accountable at every step of every process. And one of the things that we see in the Roosevelt study is that DGS paid for third parties to come back around and assess what was wrong. But what we need to make sure we do is not have it be after the fact, have it be while a project is in motion, to not sign off on things that are not completely done. And that's, I believe, Mr. Chairman, I believe that's a cultural issue. I believe that's a workplace. I believe that's a tone at the top issue. And it's something where we need to just have a government-wide commitment to accountability for each step along these processes. And if you ask me how to get from here to there, I don't know, but I will certainly keep thinking about it, because that's the nature of the job.
Well, and that is the goal. I mean, the goal here isn't for you to issue a report that doesn't change anything. And our interest, the council's interest in a report that you do, is to look for how we can improve, where we should improve, how we can improve. But if it doesn't improve, then that doesn't accomplish anything. I'm not sure there's an easy, well, there isn't an easy answer to my question, but these different reports come to mind, and I don't think I can have an oversight hearing or a confirmation hearing with you without discussing how is it that we get these executive agencies to respond.
I think one of the ways is just through pretty constant oversight. You know, if there is a particular issue, and I'll go back in time, and I'm thinking of our former colleague, Mr. Catania, who had oversight for the Department of Health at a period of time when that agency was struggling, and he had an oversight hearing on his issues with DOH, the Department of Health. You know, he had a monthly hearing, and he went over them, you know, and sort of battered them over and over again on school nurse program and on other programs. I mean, I think one way to keep pressure on is to keep pressure on. I think of your former colleague, Councilmember Silverman, and the hearings, the series of hearings she did on the paid family leave program as it was being implemented. It wasn't one hearing, it wasn't two hearings, it was, I think, 10. And it was at each stage of implementing that program to say, okay, where's the procurement for the IT system? Where's the competition? It's like each step along the way. I mean, those are sort of oversight tools that I think the council can do more of, that I think would be helpful. And I think the way in which we follow up on our report on our recommendations is another really important way to try to do that. We require agencies to document that they have done things. They don't just say, yeah, we've done that, or we're not going to do it. They say, if they've done it, we say, okay, give us the documentation and let's prove it. And we do try to be very serious about that documentation. And on the vacant and blighted, I'd have to go back and look at what we did in our rec compliance reporting on that for the different recommendations. And I take your point, if they haven't improved, they haven't improved.
Well, as of a year ago, they had not. Some things have happened since then, but I can assure you that between 2017, which is when that report came out, and 2022, wasn't much improvement. Give me just a second. I don't have any other questions for you.
Can I add one more answer to your last question?
Yes.
If you want some really light bedtime reading, we issued a report several years ago. We called it a white paper, and it was on the lack of internal controls across the district government. And what we did was essentially what you've just done verbally. We took a bunch of findings from a bunch of reports and said, why do we keep coming up with the same conclusions? And let me give you one example. One example was lack of standard operating procedures. And how can an agency have a program that's been operating for 20 years and not have written down standard operating procedures? But we find that in audit after audit. So this is a very small recommendation that came out of that white paper. But one thing that they do, I believe in the federal government, is every year, every agency director has to sign off on a piece of paper that says, you know, everything. And I think it goes like this, that all the processes in my agency have their own written controls. We have standard operating procedures for everything in my agency, and they sign off on them. I mean, something like making sure that an agency has standard operating procedures for everything they do, that's something we need to do government-wide. And I think that's something that maybe I will go back to that report and reread it myself as I'm recommending it to you.
Thank you. All right, I have no other questions for you. That's going to conclude this hearing. Thank you, Ms. Patterson, for your service. Thank you for your willingness to serve another term.
Thank you.
As I indicated at the beginning of this hearing, the record will close at 5 p.m. on Monday, February 6th, 2023. The time is 3:08 and this hearing is adjourned.